Well, in sociology, we have a concept called anomie. And Emil Durkheim, German as he sounds, is actually French. He divided suicide into 4 types. One of the important ones was anomic. And anomie was a phenomenon which he largely worked on, but it's when a society doesn't have a clear set of values, the values keep changing, the values keep getting intermingled, which leads to different forms of corruption. We tend to think of corruption in this country mainly in a monetary sense, but moral corruption. These things contribute to a great unrest in the soul, in the mind, and that causes a massive disequilibrium. And this disequilibrium drives people to desperate acts. I believe that we've been in a society with anomic structure. The anomie was a little less at the time of independence. There was idealism, there was devotion to work. That has eroded quite a bit, and especially in the last 50 years. It's very marked currently. You have a culture where dissidence is not allowed, where you're not allowed to have your say, and that causes the internal unrest to get magnified a lot more. So that contributes a lot to why suicides have increased in the recent past. You mentioned Werther syndrome. Werther syndrome is a very specific thing. I like to call it the Ek Duje Ke Liye syndrome, or more correctly, the Maro Charitra syndrome, because there was this famous, I think, Telugu movie which was imitated in Hindi. Unfortunately, in this country, we don't document things properly. Young Man Werther was a novel, I think, or a long short story, novella, written by the genius Johann Wolfgang Goethe. Goethe wrote this because he had a disappointed love life, and he sublimated his crisis in the form of a novel where the hero, disappointed in his love life, he's rejected, and he commits suicide, cutting a very long romantic story short. And that was a way out when your romantic aspirations are thwarted. This is the way out. That was the message that went across. Reading this novel across Europe, but mainly in Central Europe, around Germany, a lot of people committed suicide. And that really was the Werther syndrome. In our country, we had a similar phenomenon when this movie Ek Duje Ke Liye, again, here there were 2 lovers. They were not allowed to continue with their romance, and they ended their lives. And seeing that example, I'm aware of at least 13 cases of people ending their lives. It started with Maro Charitra. It went on with, it was much more magnified as it tends to be with Hindi translations of media works. People ended their lives, if I'm not mistaken, across the country, but mainly in the north. But this was just written about in passing. Nobody documented, nobody counted the number of cases of Ek Duje Ke Liye kind of murders. Now, this happens fairly commonly among young people, especially those who don't have a good support structure. If the support structure is not good enough, and your eyes are completely focused only on the potential romantic relationship, disappointment in that potential romance leads to desperate acts. Most commonly, yes. The reason we say this is also because enough research across the world seems to suggest that people who have survived a suicide attempt are likely to say that I ought not to have done that, or I wish I had known there's a way out. So those are the suicide survivors. It's ironic because the indicator for completed suicide, the worst risk factor, is an earlier attempted suicide. So the two seem to be paradoxical, but they're not really. So I would say that in a moment of desperation, it's like this, you have a huge fresco on a wall. There are various shades over there. It looks very beautiful from a distance, but you go up too close to it and you see only a dark gray or black patch, and you see everything is only black. You need to step aside and see the rest of the colorful spectrum that's available over there, and then you notice that there's much more to life than just that dark patch. So this happens very commonly, and if people are given the means to move back to see the entire fresco, the chances of their resorting to, I'll use the word, desperate act is much greater.
So is it desperate act or is it I mean, I do not know, but I'm asking you, is it a sense of hopelessness? Is it
Absolutely. What's the difference between hopeless and desperate? So, classically in mental health, we are taught that there is a stage of distress. Distress goes on to helplessness. Helplessness goes on to hopelessness. So, when it reaches a stage of hopelessness, the chances of taking recourse to this or to other potentially lethal acts like chemical addictions, alcoholism being a cardinal example, much greater. Those are two very important but different questions. So we'll keep resilience aside for the moment. Depression is an illness of the emotions where the emotional feeling is one of lowness, the feeling is of sadness. The accompaniments of sadness can be other negative emotions like anger, irritation, not being in a sanguine frame of mind at all. Depression is a forerunner of suicide in a substantial number of cases. The statistics vary across the world depending on how rigid the research has been. Depression is a well-known forerunner of suicidal attempts and completed suicide as well. Sorry, can we go back to your question?
Yeah,
who are the people prone to it? So people who have a clear history of depression in the past, people who have depression currently, people who have a family loading of depression, because it seems that a substantial minority, I won't say majority of depression, is genetically determined. So all these are necessary, they are necessarily forerunners of suicide. Quite apart from this, related to what I spoke about earlier about anomie, wherever the social structure is not definite, not something you can rely on, economic factors operate a lot, and there we come to farmer suicides, which you had mentioned. They add to the risk of suicide. So farmers who've taken massive loans and have no hope of repaying at all, they are the ones who tend to take recourse to this measure. It's obviously a very desperate measure. Now, if you have a farmer who's got a huge loan, who has a history of depression, who has a history of alcoholism, perhaps not in himself but in his family, the risk keeps on multiplying that many fold.
But sir, I mean, the second question was, how does one build resilience?
Okay. That really is the realm of preventing suicide, and resilience cannot be built overnight. Resilience comes from a very early age. Resilience can be strengthened. Resilience can be sort of instilled in people when the amount of innate resilience is inadequate, then it can be instilled. How do we do that? We teach people to move away from the fresco again. We teach people to look at the positive sides of life. We teach people to create a support system as far as possible if a good one is not already in place. All these are components of increasing resilience. Multifarious interests abound in people who have resilience. People who are single-minded and devoted only to one pursuit in life are less likely to be resilient. But there are remarkable people like Roger Federer. His only pursuit in life, he has very clearly said, is tennis. They can be very, very resilient. I can't ever imagine Roger resorting to this kind of an act. There's a caveat to that. These celebrities who end up taking their lives are usually in the glamorous showbiz type of. They're not sports people. They're not chess players. They're not outstanding in any academic field otherwise. So these people want to be in the Prakash Jyot all the time. They want the limelight on them. They want the limelight on them. And if the limelight seems to fade, or if some venture of theirs has not worked out the way they would have liked, they get disappointed. If there are multiple such disappointments, then it happens that they get an intense internal feeling of rejection. And obviously, that element of resilience is deficient over there. I don't want to do medicine. I don't want to be pushed into a training school. I don't want to be, exactly, and those people, and one interesting young person told me she was pushed into medicine merely because I had good marks. Because my mother wanted to do medicine for a variety of reasons. She couldn't do it. She kept telling me that I have to get into medicine. I did very well in high school. I did excellently in +2, and I was pushed into medicine. I never really wanted to do it. That's an extreme example, but that drives home the point that this person's personal choice was given practically no respect. Practically, I say because when I met the mother, it seemed like she was a very democratic sounding mother. Usko jo karna hai karne dete the. Having a doctor in the family is so prestigious. Just an aside, no. So that kind of thing situation also obtains, and people get pushed into careers. People get pushed into marriages, even now, though much less today than when I started my medical career. It's much less, but it's still there. And this is, again, the disallowing of expression of one's own needs, one's own perceived priorities. All this drives people to wanting to take their lives.
So this messaging about prevention of suicide, it is for who? It is for the students or the parents?
Both, very much both. To tell the young people that, listen, even if your parents are very subtly or overtly tyrannical, that's not the end of the world. There are agencies that will help you. There are people who are willing to be your support system. Take recourse to those. For the parents, the message is that don't breathe down your child's neck. You may believe it's out of concern and affection, but really it's stifling the child's personality, and this is totally to be disallowed. That's a good question. Usually those are forerunners of what we talked about, depression. So a tendency to be one of two extremes. One is that completely withdrawn from social interaction. The other is getting highly moody and easily upset. If this is not part of the individual's personality, then watch out for the possibility that this person is slowly going in the downward spiral of depression. Withdrawal from normal interests. My child used to go out and play every evening, doesn't want to do that anymore, is forced to stay at home, or no, he feels forced to stay at home. He doesn't seem to enjoy his music lessons anymore. So withdrawal from personal interest also is a warning sign. Psychobiological dysfunction, the appetite being reduced, the sleep not being regular, sometimes even the eliminatory functions not being okay, can be indications. Excessive rebelliousness, which has emerged in a child who was otherwise kind of balanced and not particularly rebellious, is sometimes an indicator that something is going wrong over here and needs attention. Now, not all of them are prone to suicide, I'll say that, but that has been the forerunner in a substantial number of cases, and we are very preoccupied currently with the fact that suicide has increased in the younger population, especially, let's say, between 15 and 25. Right, you're right, and that's a word we use very commonly. And I mentioned that when we go back to people who have survived a suicide attempt, we find that a substantial number of them eventually say that, no, I need not have resorted to this act. Those are the impulsive suicides. If I break into vernacular now and then, it's okay. No? Yes. Yeah. So, ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಜಗಳ ಇತ್ತು ತಕ್ಷಣ ನನಗೆ ಏನು ತೋಚಲಿಲ್ಲ ಇದೇ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ಟೆ ಅಂತ. That's a very common story. But with mobile addiction, it's much more serious. It's largely an internet addiction. The mobile by itself is seldom the cause, but because internet, thank you, abled devices, whether it's a tab or a phone or even a I hope everybody's having coffee. uh, so the internet addiction is what's mainly responsible, and the internet has become like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. You know, everybody follows it blindly, and many people are onto the internet just because it's difficult for them to get away from it. It seems like certain brain circuits are completely logged. I mean, they are no longer they're no longer malleable. They become very rigid, and that's the danger. So, internet addiction seems to be a forerunner of desperate acts in a few people, not the vast majority of people. Mobile addiction is definitely, you ask for signs of suicide. It's a relatively minor sign of emotional immaturity and a need to. But when I say emotional immaturity, I must also say that there are some very bright students who also get hooked onto the, and this becomes the constant companion to take to bed. It has happened even with older people who have neglected their life partner, but they are onto this. There is also the other angle of addiction to pornography, and pornography has become so much easier to access with the arrival of the internet. And the fantasy sexual life is far superior to the real sexual life in this person's mind. It may not be the reality if you look at objective measures such as are possible, but that is another reason why internet addiction. But with internet addiction, we're digressing from the actual point of suicide, because internet addiction alone is not a good predictor of suicidal behavior. It's certainly a measure that compromises their achievements in life. So we mentioned genes in the context of depression. So I think with major depressive illness, the genetic contribution is about 80%, and the environmental contribution, very rough estimates, would be about 20%. With impulsive suicides, the genetic contribution would be about 5 or 10%, because we imitate a behavior that we see around us. Most commonly, behavior within the family, and then again, mostly the parents. We tend to imitate our parents' behavior at a very young age. As we grow older, we find our own feet, and we even rebel against, I don't want to be like my father or mother, is a common reaction in adolescence. The nature versus nurture controversy will not be resolved in my lifetime, not even in your lifetime, but both factors do contribute a lot, and the nature part of it is in two fields. One is genetics, the other is toxicology. Wherever the input into this, the biological inputs into this individual in the form of food, in the form of the air and the surroundings that he or she lives in are poisonous, and there we can get metaphoric also about poisonous environments. They contribute certainly to a bad mental makeup, cross-sectionally or longitudinally. It's very uncommon to see small children indulging in suicide. The youngest case, when I was a postgraduate at NIMHANS, the youngest case recorded was by one of our former professors of psychology in NIMHANS. Dr. Satyavati had recorded a case of an 8-year-old who had indulged in suicidal behavior because she was denied a visit to the circus at a time when she wanted to go. The family had decided we'll go the next weekend. She threw a tantrum, and then she took something which it was probably, and this is a term which is commonly used, cry for help. So to gain attention, she did something. She swallowed poison. Unfortunately, the outcome was fatal.
Recently, there was a case, a 9th standard girl. She just comes back from
9th standard girl would still be 9 and 6, let's say about 15 years old.
14.
Yeah. In that age group, it is quite well known. Fortunately, it's not very common, but it's well known that at that age, vulnerability to suicide is much more. Schools should look after the academic development of the child and see that there is fairness in their dealing with the child. Teachers should not be very harsh, they should not be abusive, and the school should have some kind of a infrastructure for providing counseling, directly or indirectly. I know a number of school counselors. I've been an advisor to school counseling services, but what happens is the kid or the kid's parent says, Illi beda, you give me your address, we'll come and see you privately. Don't want to be seen as the weakling in front of others. This is very common in our profession generally. So the schools cannot do a whole lot. It's the support system at home that counts a lot. Parental strife, continuous bickering at home, cold wars that go on in the house, alcoholism and wife beating which still attends on our society, all this affects a child's mind much more than we realize. And sometimes both parents are very nice to the child. Each parent says, I'm your best friend, don't worry about that. I fight with mom, that's a different matter. The child is getting affected because his seeking of stability is through seeing a stable, healthy home atmosphere where arguments don't necessarily lead to warfare. If he perceives that there is warfare going on even between the parents, even if he's not warring, he gets deeply affected by the conflictual situation at home and feels that there is no stability over here. Look at so-and-so, his parents are so good. That looks like a happy family. Ours is not like that, and he resorts to this kind of fact. Familial factors contribute a lot more to younger suicides than school factors. That is what we call the paradise lost paradigm, as though, joint families, everything was perfect. And I certainly feel that joint families contributed quite a bit to providing alternative social support when the own parents were not getting on too well. There was an uncle or a grandparent who would be able to provide that support. But nuclear families also can have those values. You should not have, it was very much in vogue to speak about the latchkey families. But that's an old phenomenon now, though it still exists, old nomenclature, but it's still there. Parents who have absolutely no time for the child, and then they feed to the child that, tere liye to sab kar rahe hain. Both of us are working hard. Why? Because we want to get you into a good educational institution. The child is saying, how about spending some time with me? The cliche, of course, is quality time, but you all seem to have no time for me. So when you don't have time for me, what do? I take recourse to the TV. Now, of course, over the last 20, 25 years, it's the internet that provides me much more succor. And there is no governing of what the child does on the internet, whom he interacts with, what kind of material is she or he going to access. And on the internet, if you are suicidally inclined, I don't know if it still exists because we requested people to work on this, methods of committing suicide. So many young people have recourse to fatal means because they have listed this is the guaranteed method. It's a horrible thing to have. Definitely, this whole concept of gatekeepers comes from what you talked about, early signs of suicide. So these gatekeepers are people who can quickly pick it up and disallow entry into that gate actually of suicide. So this phenomenon was first, I think, written about in 80s and didn't get much attention till the turn of the century, and then gatekeeping became a very important facet. And gatekeepers are people trained to pick up early signs of people who are prone to suicide, not necessarily overtly sharing their suicidal ideation. One, we talked about romantic lovers ending their lives together. Sometimes people get married, and I know of two couples who committed suicide after getting married just to spite the face kind of thing, I mean, to tell the parents that we did it, we know we can't survive without your support, or that, but you thought this would stigmatize you, now watch for the stigma. There's a nice couplet from a Hindi song which says, मरने से पहले कुछ करने से पहले लेके तेरा नाम तुझे बदनाम मैं कर जाऊंगी. So I'm going to see to it that you're stigmatized. That's one context of familial suicide. The other thing that we see very commonly, to a great extent preventable because we are not adequately sensitive to it, we don't prevent it, there is postpartum depression. So soon after childbirth, a woman is about 3 times more prone to depression than she would otherwise be. And it doesn't have to be a generic loading of depression, though that aggravates the picture. So a woman who feels desperate says, I'm feeling very low, I don't feel like looking after my child, it's not the child's fault, I'll first kill the child and then kill myself. This phenomenon is very well known. In an economic crisis, it is well known, and your papers carry these stories, I would reckon at least once a month, about the man of the house finishing off the child, the mother, and then himself, or sometimes children and the mother. I was very shaken up when I was doing my post-graduation about a doctor who had been a very popular general practitioner in South Karnataka, whose business dwindled as more and more medical practitioners came in. He was perceived as very old-fashioned, and he decided that pursuing this line is not good enough. They sold the family lands. That didn't sustain them for too long. Then they came to one of the better hotels in Bangalore, and the whole family committed suicide. One girl survived, and it was very clearly stated that we are resigning from life. I think the youngest child was 7 or 8, and the one who survived, she was about 12. There were 4 children, if I'm not mistaken, and the parents who committed suicide. So when there is an economic crisis, this kind of the family deciding that enough is enough, we can't take it anymore, is known. It's not common, but it's known.
But family suicides are also influenced by cults, isn't it? You know, like what we saw in Delhi.
Yes, that was a horrible thing, wasn't it? 11 members of a family.
Yeah.
Cults engaging in this lethal act, it's very well known. The worst example, of course, is the Jonestown massacre. The very charismatic leader I was taken up with him, Reverend Jones. He had such a wonderful worldview. Of course, I was young and vulnerable and impressionable, I should say, at that time. And then it was found that they were engaging in drug abuse, they were engaging in prostitution, they were engaging in different forms of sexual abuse, and the commune had become kind of, they built a shell around themselves, and the CIA were alerted to the fact that they might be the root cause of trading in drugs, illicit drugs, of course, in the southern parts of America. They had, I think, camped on an island somewhere in the West Indies, and that was Jonestown. And he was a very effective speaker, and people could come under his spell. Even people who were not followers of the cult were very impressed with his oratory. And when the CIA decided to pursue the matter, a delegation, I think, of 6 people, including some senators, were coming there to visit, and he just distributed poison, some kind of a liquid sweetened but with poison, and announced that the time has come for us to go. And I think it was about 400 plus people who committed suicide. That's it.
Recently also they are digging some graves in which, you know, I think it's in Africa. This particular community followed a cult leader who said that, you know, and many children were buried alive with the hope that you will be resurrected.
That is obviously a delusional system over there, but here it was clearly fear of the hand of law coming in, and that they would face terrible legal consequences. Death was a better alternative in Jonestown. But cults can lead to a lot of positive action. We will not deny that. A lot of good social work also happens from cults, but it's too much to expect that every cult can be monitored and governed properly. Charismatic cult leaders who don't have a strong enough personal structure are the ones who are likely to lead people astray, and then because the guru had said so, we are all going to do it, is a phenomenon that can occur. Okay, so now we'll come. Yeah, so resilience is at one level a very abstract concept, otherwise a fairly well-defined one, where you do not allow yourself to break down. You are so strong within that external factors are not going to impede your faith in life. So again, going back to the paradise lost paradigm, life was much simpler. Pleasures were simple. Reaching out for help was much easier. I mean, to trot the cliche, there are hundreds of people with 2,000 Facebook friends, but not one whom you will confide in, open up to, take the help of. This is a fairly common phenomenon. And I think I wrote about this somewhere else, about three epidemics that are there. One is hedonism. I want pleasure all the time. The second thing is loneliness. I thought I had coined the term. Then I gave a couple of lectures and discovered that actually Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of America, had already used the term epidemic of loneliness. We live in a terribly lonely world, and especially people, no offense meant to people who live in apartments, they don't know the neighbors at all. ಅವರು 8 ಗಂಟೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ 7 ಗಂಟೆಗೆ ಬರ್ತಾರೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಗೊತ್ತು. We don't even know their names. By the way, hedonism and loneliness are not mutually exclusive, they're not two ends of the spectrum. They tend to occur together. Because I'm so preoccupied with my video game over here, I have no time to go out and play football or any other game where I'd associate with other people. Fellow feeling develops over there. I play Scrabble with you all the time. You and I are rivals all the time. That's the kind of thing that goes on. Even when you play football online, it's very rarely that you get any kind of buddy feeling. The effervescence that you talked about is more in the lines of the cult. So together, everybody becomes desperate. Very clearly, it's more of an urban phenomenon than a rural phenomenon. Rural India tends to have more absorbing mechanisms available, and we'll take a very different example. Chronic mental illness, for instance, is accepted by the community in rural India much better than in urban India. In urban India, we are I hate to use the word, but semi-American, because if you're not productive, you're out. Whether you're out actually physically or whether you are not dealt with empathy and understanding is a moot question. So interesting, if I have the time for an aside, then there was something called the International Pilot Study of Schizophrenia. And the International Pilot Study of Schizophrenia found that the outcome for chronic schizophrenia in India was about 6 times better than in developed countries. So the fact is that the degree of disability in the individual was not less, but it was absorbed. It was not thought of as somebody who needs to be outcast. It's not if you're not productive, you're out was not a philosophy we had internalized, especially in rural India. The Indian participation in that study was from Agra, where one of the largest mental hospitals in the country is located. So in rural Uttar Pradesh, it was quite okay. Thoda pagal hai, chalta hai, we get him, he's part of us. Completed suicides tend to be more common in males. Attempts at suicide seem to be much more common in females. I don't want to get sexist over here, but there is the tendency to take a sexist stance and say that women are doing it much more for attention, men are not. That's not at all corroborated by research. But women tend to survive suicide attempts much more commonly. Men seem much more determined to take recourse to lethal methods, gunshot, less common in this country, of course. Jumping off heights, drowning. Violent deaths are more commonly resorted to by men. Overdose of prescribed medication, taking of insecticide or other poisons available in the house like phenol, is more common among females. So women and men, I would reckon, attempt suicide equally often. Men tend to have a lethal outcome much more commonly than women. In rural India, the oppression of women still continues much more. In respect, I don't know if I could use that kind of Bimaru states, it's much, much more. We don't call them Bimaru anymore. We've been told not to call them Bimaru. But wherever the male chauvinism is much more, the chances of women giving up and wanting to end their lives is likely to be more.
But isn't that a dichotomy? Kerala is supposed to be the best literate state, and the number of suicides are the highest among women in that state.
I think they have a much better reporting system. That's really an epiphenomenon than an actual phenomenon.
Coming back to
Our education, by the way, is not a guaranteed method of preventing suicide. It helps, but it's not.
It's a matrilineal society also. If you have to look at the social markers, I mean, it has both. Then why do we have more women?
We haven't adequately teased out the matter. For instance, all of Kerala is not matrilineal. Certainly the Nayars and the Tiyas are matrilineal, but there are segments of society, the Malayali Christians are not matrilineal. So it varies. So I don't know that anybody has teased this matter out adequately to say that in spite of being a matrilineal society, how come there are more female suicides in Kerala than in the other parts of the country? That's a very funny thing. We have a separate, I am not good on the law generally, confession time, but there is a separate law which makes suicide a crime. And there is a Mental Health Care Act which went beyond its actual purview, which said that suicide must not be considered a crime. We gladly accepted that. But the law which said that suicide is a crime has not yet been undone.
No, the reporting.
That distinction is so artificial and meaningless to me. Death by suicide and committed suicide.
just want to know media, how should
Media should not indulge in. We had a seminar on this in Nimhans in Dr. Mohan Isaac had organized this in 2011. There were a couple of very sensitive journalists. One I remember was, some papers are notorious for capitalizing on speculative stories about people who end their lives. And very juicy stories are told about, and stories are invented at times. I've had the unfortunate incident of my second cousin's husband, for a certain familial reasons, but the story that was built around that family about how the daughter was of loose morals, how the son was an alcoholic, all of which was invented, which is not even true. And the story went on for about, they made it like a series, For the next 6 days, we will talk about the, let's say the Sharma's suicide. 6 days it was serialized. And the family did not want to go to court because they said we are inviting more attention to a matter that we'd rather forget. But irresponsible reporting is rampant. Even a facet like somebody being alcohol dependent before committing suicide should not necessarily be revealed. And every report of suicide must be accompanied by help is available at such and such number. That's happening a lot more, I notice, even on the net. It has helped. It has helped. I work with the Medico-Pastoral Association, which was the first NGO in mental health in our country, and they started the first helpline in Bangalore. And a lot of people have told us that we keep having crops of volunteers who come and take the training with us. Some venture out on their own, some join the Sahaya helpline. That seeing the Sahaya helpline has helped a number of people. And Sahaya's handicap was that it was not 24/7. To be only on working days and only up to 6 o'clock. Now with the pandemic, we've ventured into online consultations, and it is available somebody is available 24/7. Meanwhile, at least 6 other helplines, including NIMHANS, are now available to us, and they are doing a pretty good job. So I don't think it's useless to have this signal. But yes, some people who are determined in their fatal designs, just I don't want to pay attention to that. I know this is the only way out. And I think we have to really, in the interest of the person's life, leave personal freedoms aside and grab that person and try and save him. Especially if there has been a clinically significant depression in this individual, then treatment is necessary and sometimes has to be given against the patient's will. It's not at all widespread. You've hit the nail on the head. We need competent counselors. We need competent therapists in every vernacular. In this country, we have so many. And there are bilingual therapists, quite a few. Therapy in general tends to be an expensive proposition. So I think the government ought to invest a lot more in providing competent therapists in the vernacular across the country. There, Kerala scores much better than the others because they have that available, and the stigma attached to a mental health consultation is much less there than in any other part of the country, as far as I'm aware. Orissa is another state where they have ventured into mental health and suicide prevention in some measure, though I don't have the details. So you're absolutely right. We need much more counseling. Should everybody be in therapy? Moot question. But we certainly say that mental health professionals should be in therapy. Psychiatrists and psychologists hardly ever open up about their own issues. And Freud was the first one. I mean, we may deride Freud for a number of flaws, and they're legion. But I think mental health professionals need to unload, and because it's a very stressful profession. I'm not playing for sympathy, but generally. So they need to be in therapy, definitely, to sort out their own heads. Everybody being in therapy, sorry, I'll just come to you. Everybody being in therapy is like, everybody should periodically check up their BP and see that the biochemical parameters are in order. Yes, it's a very valid concept. But what will you go and tell your therapist? I'm fine, I wrote this poem today, I scored I took 3 wickets today in my game. I didn't do as well in this test as I did in the last. Now, these things usually happen within a family. And if there's a wise elder in the family, or a couple of them, it works out well. Even an elder sibling or some other wise, even a good neighbor can be a good therapist. Formal therapy, I would not say that everybody needs to be in therapy. But some form of introspection and some form of sharing helps a lot to keep your mental apparatus in decent shape. Yeah, you were saying? My profession is going to bang me for saying this. We don't need so many psychiatrists as we need psychologists. In keeping with what's your name? As Ms. Puran said, we need many more counselors, and psychiatrists are necessary, and we have an inadequate number of psychiatrists. I will not, but my contention at every forum that I could address has been that we need many more psychologists, and psychologists with clinical training, So, because psychiatrists are medical people basically who are also allowed to prescribe medication. Our ratio of psychiatrists to population is miserable compared to the West. But what happens is very commonly, again I hang my head in shame on behalf of my profession, too many people reach out for writing prescriptions where none is necessary. Prescriptions are necessary, but where in many cases, what is necessary is good counseling skills, bringing two people who are fractious together, sorting out interpersonal issues, which does not require a prescription. पर एक के बदले दोनों को prescription दे दिया. This happens so often, I'm ashamed of it. What they do is they keep the engine on, close the garage, make sure there is no outlet, and carbon monoxide poisoning is what happens. They don't really take any noxious gas in. The running of the engine is enough to generate enough carbon monoxide, and this is a very common method, not the commonest, but a very common method in the West, where cars and garages were much more. I've heard of such instances in Bombay, and I'm not aware of it having occurred in Bangalore. I see. But yes. No, covering themselves with duct tape and getting inside the car is to make sure that nobody has access to taking them out. But that's suffocation rather than gaseous poisoning. Very good point. In the context of resilience, resilience is always accompanied by adequate respect for oneself. And if you don't have enough respect for yourself, you call it self-love, I'll call it self-respect. People say self-esteem, which is a pompous term, but you respect yourself enough, the chances of your respecting your need to live would be much greater. If you don't, I find they're going much further. I mean, the closer home, I mean, I didn't get any likes. Mine was such a good post that nobody gave me a like that drives young people into depression. So this external validation becoming more and more rampant is also on account of that loneliness that we spoke about and hedonism. I must feel good all the time. How dare anybody not like my post?
But they may not have any self-love. I mean, you don't know.
Correct. Now this self-love comes starting, I mean, if you go to the psychoanalytic framework, then it starts with the mother liking you enough, spending enough time with you, at the same time being very willing to correct you, even using what may seem like harsh methods of disciplining at the right time, in the right measure, and not irreversibly. So I'll give you a whack on the cheek at one stage, doesn't mean that I will not hold you and say that you needed that whack for XYZ reason. Now, good disciplining involves this. And good disciplining also is accompanied by good positive strokes from the authorities in our younger days. That is how self-respect and self-love develop in the long run. If those are inadequate, the chances are the person never had enough validation. There are, unwittingly, we promote narcissism a lot by going on praising children for every little thing. He stood up today, he walked 3 steps today, let's take a selfie of this, take a selfie of that. Yeah, and correct. The need for getting claps is for every little achievement. And that's what aberrant values develop, because we want validation from outside all the time. All of us need validation from outside, but if that becomes the dominant theme in our lives and we don't respect ourselves enough, then the downfall begins very, very subtly, and it corrodes you from within, but very slowly. Give them the right positive strokes. Don't overdo it. And when they need correction, do it in a private fashion rather than making an issue of it. I'm dealing with a person in his late 40s whose father used to strip him and make him walk down the street and then belt him. This was his idea of, and his defense was that I'm an army man. This is the way we have to discipline people. And what had this person done? He had got some pornographic literature, and the father found that he was hiding this literature and perhaps masturbating to it or sharing it with others, which is such a normal phenomenon at that particular age. This person is scarred for life. And what happened to him was his son indulged in some disciplinary, what should we say, infringement. Sounds so pompous. No? He was behaving in an indisciplined fashion, and the father took out his belt. The mother told me, so what is this? He said, yeah, I lost it for a moment because this is the way I was disciplined. This does not pertain directly to suicide, but this is how crude methods of disciplining need to be corrected, need to be set right.
So coming to suicide rates, which city in India
Asha, so when I was When I was a postgraduate, we used to say the pubs had just started coming up in Bangalore. So we said we are the garden city of India. We had not yet become the garbage city of India, which we are now. And we are the pub capital of India, and we are the suicide capital of India, which is not strictly true. Wherever you have a good reporting system, the veracity of suicide data would be much more. So probably Bangalore had, I think Mr. Nizamuddin used to be the police commissioner over here, and reporting all forms of law breaking were much better. Cities which tend to have a larger floating population, and that includes all the metros, suicide rate tends to be a little more. One reason for that, which is very well written about by one of the first researchers in suicide in this country, was late Professor Venkoba Rao, was that people come to these cities from the periphery or sometimes from very distant places, check into a hotel or commit suicide over there because it will not be known way back in the hometown. Kerala, as she mentioned, has a significant rate of suicide, which is paradoxical given its social indices being much better and medical indices also being much better. Bangalore is no longer the suicide capital. If I'm not mistaken, the last urban data suggested Calcutta had the highest rate of suicides. Peculiarly, again, Bimaru states had lower rates of suicide than South India. I don't think that's a fair data. No, that's they cover up very easily. That's the upper segments of society and the lower segments of society. I know of at least 3 actual instances of individuals I've known who had committed suicide from the upper echelons of society, where it was hushed up, made to appear like heart attacks. The man has jumped off a roof and ended his life, but it's hushed up as he had a heart attack. And in his heart attack, he had a heart attack leaning on the balcony and he fell. Now, it was clearly, I know the case, so I know it's suicide. So in those 2 segments, the hushing up happens much more. Middle class are more open and more likely to report things. So I think it's these, if you broadly classify as underprivileged, middle class and upper classes, I think it's not particularly more in any one segment of them.
So but I find myself that I am lesser privileged than my house attendant who comes to work for me emotionally. I find them far more emotionally strong. Have you seen this, or it's my own observation? They have their own mechanisms to cope with emotional trauma.
No, I'm not sure that they necessarily have healthy mechanisms of coping with the stresses in their lives. Alcoholism is much more common among them, for instance. Wife beating is much more common among them. But they don't go to the extent of marital breakdown because the woman clings on to the marriage because she feels desperate.
Which happens even in middle class and upper class.
Lesser so. The chances of your finding a good lawyer and giving you a decent deal in a divorce is much better when you're a middle class or upper class person.
But you do hear that my husband beats, but he's a good man. He drinks, but he's a good man.
Yeah, I would reckon that is more common among the lower strata.
No, even in the...
It is not absent there, but it's more common among the lower people, is my feeling. Must be taken very seriously. No suggestion that somebody is likely to take his life must ever be taken lightly. Sometimes it's an attention-seeking gimmick, but even if it's an attention-seeking gimmick, better to err on the side of over-caution rather than underplaying it. So if somebody voices such things, grab him, take him to a professional who will hopefully be able to prevent such an act.
What about live suicide?
That is clearly melodrama. It can turn quite lethal. I've seen that happen actually. Not seen it happen, read about it actually happening to one of my patients. What is your own orientation? Sorry.
So whether I believe or not, I don't.
Okay, I do. I think it does play a role, and अगले जन्म में सब ठीक कर देंगे. That's the notion. So it can contribute to, but I don't think that's a major factor because The misery of this life is what is causing me to decide to give up the ghost, literally speaking. So that's the consideration. If there is an afterlife, I'll settle scores with you. You've been a horrible spouse to me. I'll haunt you through your lives. Those kind of things are known to occur, but those are not the common examples to go by. There's such a rush of mixed emotions. The commonest emotion is one of guilt. I could not do something to make my daughter survive. I didn't do enough to protect my son from this horrible act. Couldn't he have been a little more patient? I was rough with him that day, but did he have to end his life for that? Anger. And then sadness. Such an important part of my life has gone away. It's a sense of loss, never going to be back again. So there's an admixture of these negative emotions, which is quite a lot. But I think the one that tends to dominate, especially in sufficiently intelligent and sufficiently sensitive people, is guilt. That's very grossly underplayed. And we have now sort of self-help groups for people of suicide, survivors of suicide, not survivors of an attempt of suicide, but survivors who have to live with the fact that a family member or a close person has ended his or her life. No guarantee, but a good chance with enough group therapy, the guilt will be considerably attenuated over a period of time. There is a lack of resilience in these people. And the other thing that happens is these people have huge economic success and almost they don't have the wherewithal to enjoy it. No time at all. If I may again go back to my profession, doctors don't get 24 hours off in a week, clinicians. They are so stressed out. I think everybody is entitled to 24 hours off from routine duties. And doctors are among the professions most prone to this kind of thing. You'll probably think of IT professionals in Bangalore, and suicide, it is speculated, has slightly gone up among them. I don't know that there's enough data to substantiate that. But the stresses in their life are tremendous with economic success, which just becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger bank balance.
So what should one do? Because
One should have the ability to disengage, enjoy leisure, sort of recharge your batteries, take up a creative hobby. All these are facets of how your resilience can go up, even if you're not born with a very strong psychic structure. Theatre used to be my passion. Writing is something else I do. And these are my two major outlets. A little bit of gardening. And I used to do a lot of workshops with younger people and say, what's your hobby? So reading, what do you read? Those days, I'm an oldie now. So Femina, Filmfare. I said, that's barbershop reading, because those are the magazines lying around old. But genre reading, for example, if you're committed to reading about India's history, or you're committed to reading about, and it doesn't have to be non-fiction of various kinds, or even fiction. I'm good at crime fiction. I would find the differences between P.D. James and Agatha Christie. I become a specialist in my own way about crime fiction. So being intelligent enough about something and being creative, that's a hobby. Carpentry, even keeping an aquarium, gardening, playing a musical instrument, or at least if I'm not good at singing or playing a musical instrument, I learn enough about maybe hip-hop, maybe Carnatic music, maybe Hindustani. I become a bit of an expert in that. I have some expertise in understanding what the ragas are all about. That kind of thing is a hobby. Having a good hobby is a means of finding more meaning in life than you would otherwise. I think at about high school it should be introduced.
Life skills.
Middle school is too young.
Too young.
Yeah. But at the same time, teachers must be sensitive to mental health issues in children and not punish them. So many teachers in India, even today, are unaware of things like learning disorders, which get dismissed as, is determined not to do well in life kind of thing. You and I are in a minority, but I really believe that people should be given a young lady I'm dealing with now keeps complaining of this, and I think it's a grossly overstated, overrated phenomenon, body shaming. But I think a mother saying that, listen, you are overweight, you need to stop it. Why? Have you looked at yourself in the mirror? Now, if a mother says that, she's body shaming. I don't think that's quite fair. Who would be more concerned than a mother about a child overeating and putting on too much weight? So I am at my wit's end to fight this complaint about body shaming. But I'll agree that sometimes the ridicule that attends on abnormal appearances is quite gross. I remember when I used to work in St. John's long ago, child was brought, a child of a staff member in the college, and she was going on overusing soap. So we thought it's obsessive compulsive disorder, where people engage in excessive washing. It took us some time to realize that the mother had been castigating the child for being dark like her father instead of fair like the mother, and she was hoping that using a lot of soap would lighten her skin. So that was clearly body shaming to my mind, though we didn't have the term at that time. And it wasn't obsessive compulsive at all. It was just that a vague hope that using a particular soap would make her skin lighter. I had two examples that strike me as important. Both are from my days in St. John's. One is the case of the importance of sex education. A young lady who was brought to us. They were, I forget the religion, but they were a Keralite family. And this young girl had attempted suicide. Middle or lower middle class. She had bled, and she believed that this was cancer. Why did she believe it was cancer? Because her aunt had died of cervical cancer, and the symptom the aunt had was excessive bleeding from the vagina. And she thought that bleeding from the vagina just means that. She was probably 12 years old, and she had just attained menarche. And because she attained menarche, nobody had explained to her that this is a very normal phenomenon, that you should expect this at this age. She was ashamed, and she said the family had exhausted its resources in looking after the aunt's cancer. And said, now I'm going to be a bigger burden on the family. That's, I'd rather die than burden my family. So she survived, fortunately. The other was a case, not in St. John's, but in St. Martha's, where I work now. This was a time when FM radio had become very common, and every song was being dedicated in the morning shows to my girlfriend, to my fiancée, to my wife, and the other way around also. But it was important to have a boyfriend. It was important to have a girlfriend. This young lady, it took us a lot of time to get the whole story out. She was admitted with having attempted suicide. She was in a group of friends. In this group, she was the only one who did not have a boyfriend. And then they started calling her a lesbian, saying that somebody even sidled up to her and said that, listen, are you lesbian? We'll find somebody for you, kind of thing. That alarmed her, and she felt very ashamed. She came from if I'm not mistaken, the railway quarters, and from a semi-Brahminical Orthodox background. There was a boy in the neighboring house, and she told her group of friends that I have a boyfriend, and she told this boy, who was a very studious, nerdy type, told him, I'm bringing them home, just wave out to me. If you blow me a kiss, that'll be too much, that'll be nice, but if you just wave out to me, I've told them that Shashank is my boyfriend. So what happened was, Shashank was flabbergasted, and he went and told his mother, this Sheila from next door is propositioning me. So Shashank's mother tells Sheila's mother that your girl is too forward, she's propositioning my son. This mother whacks the daylights out of this poor young girl. Hammered her so bad, she felt terrible and she decided to take her life. She survived, fortunately. But this is the story. The importance of having a boyfriend was so important in that peer group that she felt, if I don't have a boyfriend, I'll be considered lesbian, I'll be considered abnormal, and I want to prove that I can belong to this group. I think these are changing values that we have to keep abreast of and tell people that if you don't happen to have a boyfriend, it's all right. You can still be quite normal at this age. Just in the 8th or 9th standard at that time.
So what's your message? I mean, how do we convey this very strongly when you've addressed all our questions? You should give life another chance and you should kind of come on, live it.
One thing is, I mentioned about taking up some pursuit other than your mainstream one. Having a creative hobby, hopefully at a young age, but even up to 40, it's not too late. Beyond 40, also it's possible, but it becomes progressively more difficult. Have a social support system where you can open up and talk to others. Ideally, your age group, but be careful about the confidences you choose. Make sure that you get enough physical exercise, and I think this is grossly underplayed. I really believe that aerobic exercise is the most underrated method of better mental health. Other physical needs like sleep and appetite and where appropriate intimacy are very, very important for good mental health, and they undermine negative emotions quite a lot. So make sure you have enough of those. The other is reach out to professionals who can provide you good help, and hopefully the professionals are not mercenary as they too often tend to be. There are, for example, in most of the medical colleges, counseling help is pretty good and available. So these would be my basic messages.
In your experience, is the stigma coming down in mental health?
Definitely. I remember when I was an undergraduate, my teacher was a gentleman called Professor H.S. Subramaniam, and Dr. Subramaniam used to have a clinic in Double Road. Subsequently, he became he has the Manasa nursing home in Jayanagar, very well-known place, but he passed away. Dr. Subramaniam used to tell us the story of how people used to park their car 2 blocks away, walk up and down the street, yaru nodta illa anta nodbittu slip into the clinic. From then to now, we've come a very long way. But even now, people hesitate. And the moment you say mental health consultation, मैं क्या पागल हूँ क्या? That's the approach. So you don't have to be pagal, just that you're in distress, and that distress can be addressed is the message that needs to go across.